He had attended elite schools, served in the military, and spent years preparing for his future role as king. Diana, despite her aristocratic background, had lived a relatively normal life compared to the constraints that had always governed Charles's existence. This difference in their life experiences would create ongoing tensions as Diana struggled to adapt to royal protocols and expectations. As their relationship progressed through the autumn and winter of 1980, the British press began to take notice. The first photographs of Diana appeared in September 1980, showing her at a polo match where Charles was playing. The images captured a young woman who appeared both beautiful and approachable, quite different from the remote figures typically associated with the royal family. The press immediately sensed a story, and Diana's life began to change dramatically as photographers started following her daily activities. The media attention was initially flattering, but quickly became overwhelming for someone who had lived a relatively private life. Diana found herself photographed while leaving her flat, going to work at the kindergarten, and running errands around London. The constant presence of photographers was stressful and invasive, but she handled it with a grace that impressed both the public and the royal family. Her natural ability to connect with people was evident even in these early press encounters, where she appeared friendly and accessible rather than aloof or annoyed. One of the most famous photographs from this period was taken in September 1980 at the Young England kindergarten where Diana worked. With Truss Teddy, she was photographed with two children, the sunlight behind her making her skirt slightly transparent. While Diana was mortified by this image, it became iconic and seemed to capture her combination of innocence and natural beauty that captivated the public. The photograph also demonstrated the intense scrutiny that would characterize her relationship with the media for the rest of her life. As the relationship became more serious, Diana was gradually introduced to the realities of royal life. She attended her first official royal event in November 1980, joining Charles at the Princess Margaret's 50th birthday party at the Ritz Hotel in London. This event was her first experience of the formal protocols and rigid etiquette that governed royal appearances. Diana had to learn everything, from how to curtsy properly to understanding the complex hierarchies that determined seating arrangements and speaking order at royal functions. The learning curve was steep, and sometimes frustrating for a young woman who had always been informal and spontaneous in her interactions with others. Diana struggled with the constraints placed on her speech and behavior, finding it difficult to be natural and warm while adhering to royal protocols. However, she was determined to succeed and worked hard to master the skills required for royal life, studying everything from constitutional history to foreign languages. Charles's proposal came in February 1981 during a private dinner at Windsor Castle. The proposal itself was somewhat unromantic by conventional standards, with Charles reportedly asking if she thought it would be a good idea for them to marry. Diana's acceptance was immediate and enthusiastic, though she later admitted that she had never seriously considered the possibility of refusing. The weight of expectation from both families and the public had made the engagement seem inevitable rather than a free choice. The official announcement of their engagement on February 24, 1981, created a worldwide sensation. The engagement interview, broadcast on television, introduced Diana to the global public and revealed both her charm and her nervousness about her new role. When asked if they were in love, Charles's response of "whatever love means" would later be seen as ominous, but at the time it was overshadowed by Diana's obvious happiness and excitement about the future. The engagement period from February to July 1981 was both magical and challenging for Diana. On one hand, she was living a fairy tale that millions of women envied. She was showered with attention, gifts, and opportunities that few people could imagine. The engagement ring, featuring a magnificent sapphire surrounded by diamonds, became one of the most famous pieces of jewelry in the world. Diana's every appearance was analyzed and celebrated, and she quickly became a fashion icon whose choices influenced style trends globally. However, the engagement period also revealed the darker side of royal life that would plague Diana throughout her marriage. She moved from her comfortable flat in Coleherne Court to Clarence House, where she lived under the watchful eye of royal staff and security. The loss of privacy and independence was profound and immediate, Diana could no longer make spontaneous decisions about her daily activities, and every aspect of her life became subject to royal protocol and security considerations. The pressure to transform herself into a suitable royal bride was immense. Diana received intensive training in royal protocol, constitutional history, and public speaking. She had to learn about the Commonwealth countries, understand the political implications of royal actions, and master the art of making public appearances that would reflect well on the monarchy. The young woman who had struggled with academic subjects found herself cramming to understand complex political and historical issues that she would be expected to discuss knowledgeably in public. Physical preparations for the wedding were equally demanding. Diana underwent a dramatic weight loss during the engagement period, dropping from a size 14 to a size 10 dress size. While this transformation was attributed to pre-wedding nerves and excitement, it marked the beginning of Diana's complicated relationship with food and body image that would persist throughout her life. The pressure to look perfect in every photograph and appearance contributed to eating disorders that Diana would struggle with for years. The wedding preparations themselves were a massive undertaking that required coordination between multiple royal households, government departments, and international dignitaries. St. Paul's Cathedral was chosen as the venue specifically because it could accommodate more guests than Westminster Abbey, reflecting the desire to create an event that would capture worldwide attention and boost British morale during a difficult economic period. Diana's wedding dress, designed by David and Elizabeth Emanuel, became one of the most famous wedding gowns in history. The dress featured a 25-foot train, hand-embroidered with 10,000 pearls and sequins, and was designed to create the perfect fairy tale image. The secrecy surrounding the dress design was intense, with security measures that rivaled state secrets to prevent any details from leaking to the press. As the wedding date approached, Diana's nervousness and uncertainty grew. She later revealed that she had serious doubts about the marriage during the engagement period, particularly after discovering Charles's continued relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles. However, the momentum of the royal machine and the global expectations made it virtually impossible to withdraw without causing a scandal that would damage both families and the monarchy itself. The wedding day, July 29, 1981, was watched by an estimated 750 million people worldwide, making it one of the most viewed events in television history at that time. The ceremony at St. Paul's Cathedral was a spectacular display of British pageantry, with representatives from royal families and governments around the world in attendance. Diana's arrival at the cathedral, stepping from the glass coach in her magnificent dress, created one of the most iconic images of the 20th century. The ceremony itself was both beautiful and revealing of the challenges ahead. Diana famously mixed up Charles's names during her vows, calling him Philip Charles Arthur George instead of Charles Philip Arthur George, a mistake that was seen as charming nervousness but also highlighted her overwhelming stress. Charles's omission of the word honor from his vows was noted by observers and would later be seen as prophetic given the difficulties that would follow. The wedding reception and celebrations continued for days, with Diana thrust immediately into her new role as Princess of Wales. The honeymoon aboard the royal yacht Britannia and later at Balmoral Castle was Diana's first extended experience of life as a working royal. The experience was mixed, with Diana enjoying some aspects of her new status while struggling with others. The honeymoon revealed the fundamental incompatibility between Charles and Diana that would define their marriage. Charles spent much of the cruise reading and pursuing his intellectual interests, while Diana felt lonely and excluded. Her attempts to engage him in more romantic activities were often rebuffed, and she began to feel that Charles saw her more as a duty than a beloved wife. At Balmoral, Diana encountered the full force of royal family traditions and expectations. The Scottish castle, beloved by the royal family for generations, was the site of numerous family gatherings where Diana felt like an outsider. The activities favored by the royal family, including hunting, fishing, and long countryside walks, were not to Diana's taste, and she struggled to find her place in the established family dynamics. The return from honeymoon marked the beginning of Diana's life as a working royal and revealed both her natural gifts and the challenges she would face. Her first official engagements showed her remarkable ability to connect with people from all backgrounds, a talent that would make her one of the most beloved members of the royal family. However, these same engagements also highlighted the constraints and expectations that would make her feel trapped in her royal role. Diana's early public appearances were characterized by a combination of nervousness and natural warmth that endeared her to the public. She had an instinctive understanding of how to make people feel special and valued, whether she was meeting dignitaries at state functions or talking with patients in hospitals. This gift for human connection was authentic and powerful, and it quickly became clear that Diana had the potential to transform the public's relationship with the monarchy. However, Diana's success in her public role was accompanied by increasing difficulties in her private life. The pressures of royal life, combined with her marital problems, led to the development of serious psychological issues, including depression and eating disorders. These struggles were hidden from the public but were known to royal staff and family members, creating a complex situation where Diana was simultaneously succeeding in her public role while suffering privately. Motherhood, transformation, and breaking royal protocol. The early 1980s marked a period of profound transformation for Diana, as she navigated the complex realities of royal marriage while discovering her own voice and purpose. The birth of her children would prove to be both her greatest joy and the catalyst for her evolution from a hesitant young royal into a confident woman determined to modernize the monarchy's approach to public service. Diana's first pregnancy was announced in November 1981, just 4 months after her wedding. The news was met with worldwide celebration, as the continuation of the royal line was seen as crucial for the stability of the monarchy. However, the pregnancy also intensified the pressures on Diana and marked the beginning of her struggle with the competing demands of public duty and personal well-being. The pregnancy was difficult both physically and emotionally for Diana. She suffered from severe morning sickness that lasted well beyond the typical first trimester, often being sick multiple times during public engagements. The royal protocol that required her to continue with scheduled appearances meant that she had to master the art of maintaining composure while dealing with significant physical discomfort. This period taught Diana valuable lessons about the strength required to fulfill royal duties regardless of personal circumstances. More challenging than the physical symptoms were the emotional pressures that accompanied Diana's pregnancy. The intense media scrutiny meant that every aspect of her condition was analyzed and reported, from her choice of maternity clothes to speculation about the baby's gender and potential names. Diana felt that her pregnancy belonged as much to the public as to herself, a feeling that would intensify her later desire to protect her children from excessive media attention. The relationship between Diana and Charles during this period was complicated by their different approaches to the pregnancy and impending parenthood. Charles maintained his regular schedule and interests, viewing the pregnancy as something Diana was handling rather than an experience they were sharing. Diana felt increasingly isolated and began to depend more heavily on the support of royal staff and her few remaining personal friends. On June 21, 1982, Prince William Arthur Philip Louis was born at St. Mary's Hospital in London, making him second in line to the throne. Diana's decision to give birth in a hospital rather than at Buckingham Palace, as was traditional, was her first significant break with royal protocol. This choice reflected her determination to have as normal an experience as possible and set a precedent that influenced royal births for future generations. Diana's approach to motherhood was revolutionary within the context of royal tradition. Previous generations of royal mothers had relied heavily on nannies and had limited daily contact with their children. Diana insisted on being actively involved in William's care, often dismissing the nanny to spend time alone with her son. She was determined that her children would have the loving, hands-on parenting that she felt had been missing from her own childhood. The early months of William's life revealed Diana's natural maternal instincts and her determination to protect her children from the more rigid aspects of royal life. She insisted on taking William with her on official tours when possible, breaking with the tradition that royal children remained at home during their parents' travels. When she and Charles toured Australia and New Zealand in 1983, 6-month-old William accompanied them, marking the first time such a young royal heir had joined an official tour. Diana's parenting style was influenced by her own experiences of childhood trauma and her desire to give her children the emotional security she had sometimes lacked. She was physically affectionate with William in a way that was unusual for royal parents, hugging and kissing him publicly and allowing him to be a normal, sometimes boisterous child rather than a miniature adult constrained by protocol. The Australia tour in 1983 was a turning point for Diana, both as a mother and as a public figure. Her decision to bring William demonstrated her determination to prioritize her role as a mother, but the tour also revealed her growing confidence and skill as a royal representative. The Australian public responded enthusiastically to Diana, often showing more interest in seeing her than Prince Charles. This marked the beginning of Diana's emergence as the most popular member of the royal family, and also created tensions with Charles, who was unaccustomed to being overshadowed. Diana's success in Australia was due partly to her natural warmth and accessibility, but also to her willingness to engage with people in ways that broke from royal tradition. She was comfortable with physical contact, readily shaking hands and accepting hugs from members of the public. She showed genuine interest in the people she met, asking personal questions and remembering details from previous conversations. These qualities made her seem more relatable and human than other royal figures. The birth of Prince Harry on September 15, 1984, further strengthened Diana's confidence in her role as a mother and her determination to raise her children according to her own values. Harry's arrival also completed what Diana saw as her primary duty to the crown, providing an heir and a spare to secure the succession. However, rather than feeling freed from obligation, Diana found that motherhood had given her a stronger sense of purpose and a clearer vision of how she wanted to use her royal platform. Diana's approach to raising William and Harry was guided by her determination to give them as normal a childhood as possible within the constraints of their royal status. She took them to McDonald's, to Disney World, and to public swimming pools. She wanted them to understand how ordinary people lived and to develop empathy for those less fortunate than themselves. These experiences, unusual for royal children, were part of Diana's larger project of modernizing the monarchy and making it more relevant to contemporary British society. The 1980s also marked the period when Diana began to develop her distinctive approach to charitable work. Her first major patronage was as president of the Royal Marsden Hospital, a role she accepted in 1984. Diana's work with cancer patients revealed her extraordinary gift for providing comfort to people facing life-threatening illnesses. She had an intuitive understanding of what patients needed emotionally and was willing to provide physical comfort in ways that broke from royal tradition. Diana's hospital visits were characterized by her willingness to sit on beds, hold hands, and engage in intimate conversations with patients. She seemed to understand instinctively that her presence could provide hope and dignity to people facing their darkest moments. The photographs of Diana comforting sick children and holding babies born with serious conditions became some of the most powerful images of her public work. Her approach to charitable work was also influenced by her own struggles with mental health issues. Diana's battles with bulimia, depression, and self-harm during the early years of her marriage gave her a deep understanding of psychological suffering. While she kept these struggles private during this period, they informed her compassionate response to others facing difficulties and her later advocacy for mental health causes. The development of Diana's charitable work coincided with growing problems in her marriage to Charles. By the mid-1980s, it was becoming clear to those close to the couple that they had fundamental incompatibilities that were not improving with time. Charles's renewed relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles was an open secret within royal circles, and Diana's awareness of this relationship contributed to her emotional difficulties. Diana's response to her marital problems was complex. On one hand, she threw herself into her public duties and charitable work with increased determination, finding fulfillment and purpose in helping others. On the other hand, she struggled with feelings of rejection and inadequacy that manifested in eating disorders and episodes of self-harm. The contrast between her public success and private suffering became one of the defining aspects of her life during this period. The late 1980s saw Diana emerging as a global figure in her own right, independent of her relationship to Charles and the royal family. Her work with AIDS patients beginning in 1987 demonstrated her willingness to tackle controversial and stigmatized issues that other royal figures avoided. At a time when ignorance and fear about AIDS were widespread, Diana's decision to shake hands with AIDS patients without gloves and to hug children with HIV sent a powerful message about compassion and dignity. Diana's AIDS work was particularly significant because it combined her natural empathy with a willingness to challenge social prejudices. The photographs of her embracing AIDS patients became iconic images that helped change public attitudes toward the disease and those affected by it. Her work in this area also demonstrated her growing independence and her willingness to use her platform to advocate for causes she cared about, regardless of whether they aligned with traditional royal concerns. The period also saw Diana developing her distinctive style and fashion sense, which became another aspect of her influence. Unlike previous royal women who adhered to conservative dress codes, Diana was willing to experiment with fashion and work with designers to create looks that were both appropriate for her role and reflective of contemporary style. Her fashion choices were closely watched and copied, making her a significant influence on global fashion trends. Diana's fashion sense was not merely about personal style, but was also a tool for communication and diplomacy. She understood the power of visual messages and used her clothing choices to show respect for the countries she visited and the causes she supported. When visiting AIDS patients, she chose clothing that was approachable and non-threatening. When representing Britain abroad, she selected outfits that showcased British designers and craftsmanship. The evolution of Diana's public role during the 1980s was also marked by her growing skill as a speaker and public performer. Initially nervous and hesitant in public speaking situations, she worked with voice coaches and public speaking experts to develop confidence and skill. Her speeches became more personal and heartfelt over time, reflecting her genuine commitment to the causes she supported rather than merely fulfilling royal obligations. Diana's growing public confidence was accompanied by increasing tensions within the royal family. Her popularity sometimes overshadowed other family members, and her willingness to break from protocol occasionally created diplomatic or constitutional complications. The royal establishment was unsure how to handle a princess who was both enormously popular and increasingly independent in her approach to royal duties. By the end of the 1980s, Diana had transformed from an uncertain young bride into a confident and influential public figure. Her work with charitable causes had established her as someone who genuinely cared about making a difference in people's lives, while her role as a mother had given her a clear sense of purpose and values. However, these same years had also seen her marriage deteriorate beyond repair, setting the stage for the dramatic events of the 90s that would fundamentally change both her life and the future of the British monarchy. The foundation Diana built during the 1980s, her relationship with her children, her charitable work, her public speaking skills, and her understanding of media and public relations would prove crucial in the challenges ahead. She had developed the strength, independence, and sense of mission that would enable her to survive the breakdown of her marriage and emerge as an even more powerful force for change in British society and beyond. The War of the Waleses and Diana's fight for truth. The 1990s began with what appeared to be a successful royal marriage, but beneath the surface, the relationship between Charles and Diana was deteriorating rapidly. This decade would see the complete breakdown of their marriage played out in the most public and damaging way possible, fundamentally changing the British monarchy and establishing Diana as a global icon independent of her royal status. The first major crack in the facade appeared during the 1991 tour of Canada. What should have been a triumphant royal visit instead became a public relations disaster when Diana was photographed looking miserable and isolated during public appearances. The contrast between her obvious unhappiness and the required performance of royal harmony was stark and impossible to ignore. Royal correspondents began to write more openly about tensions in the marriage, though they still maintained a respectful distance from the most damaging details. The situation became more serious in 1991, when Diana began cooperating secretly with Andrew Morton, a journalist working on what would become the explosive biography, Diana, Her True Story. This cooperation marked a fundamental break with royal protocol, as no member of the royal family had ever before authorized such an intimate and revealing biography while still actively serving as a working royal. Diana's decision to work with Morton was motivated by her desperation to tell her side of the story and to counter what she saw as a campaign by Charles's supporters to portray her as unstable and difficult. Through intermediaries, primarily her friend Dr. James Colthurst, Diana provided detailed information about her marriage, her struggles with bulimia and depression, her suicide attempts, and Charles's affair with Camilla Parker Bowles. The Morton book, published in June 1992, caused a sensation that reverberated around the world. For the first time, the public learned about Diana's eating disorders, her emotional struggles, and, most explosively, about Charles's continuing relationship with Camilla. The book painted a picture of a young woman who had been trapped in a loveless marriage and driven to desperate measures by her isolation and unhappiness. The immediate reaction to the Morton book was intense and polarized. Diana's supporters saw her as a victim who had finally found the courage to speak her truth, while Charles's defenders viewed the book as a betrayal of her royal duties and an unfair attack on a man who had tried to make the marriage work. The Queen and other senior royals were reportedly furious about the breach of privacy and the damage to the monarchy's reputation. Diana initially denied any involvement in the Morton book, maintaining the fiction that she had not cooperated with its author. However, her public appearances during this period, including a widely photographed visit to Carolyn Bartholomew, one of Morton's key sources, sent a clear message that she supported the book's contents. This subtle communication demonstrated Diana's growing sophistication in managing media and public opinion. The publication of the Morton book marked the beginning of what the media dubbed the War of the Waleses, a bitter public relations battle between Charles and Diana's camps that would dominate British tabloid coverage for the next several years. Both sides used leaks, strategic photo opportunities, and carefully placed stories to advance their positions and damage their opponent's reputation. The situation deteriorated further with the emergence of recorded phone conversations that provided embarrassing details about both Charles and Diana's private lives. In 1993, a recorded conversation between Charles and Camilla, dubbed Camillagate, was published, containing intimate and embarrassing details about their relationship. This was followed by the publication of recordings of Diana's conversations with James Gilby, known as Squidgygate, which revealed her emotional state and included discussions of her marriage problems. These leaked recordings were deeply damaging to both Charles and Diana, but they also demonstrated the impossible position they were in as public figures whose private lives were considered fair game for media scrutiny. The recordings showed the human cost of living under constant surveillance and the pressure to maintain public facades while dealing with private pain. The formal announcement of Charles and Diana's separation came in December 1992, delivered by Prime Minister John Major to the House of Commons. The announcement was carefully worded to minimize constitutional implications, emphasizing that Diana would continue to carry out public duties and that there were no plans for divorce. However, the separation represented the effective end of the fairy tale marriage that had captivated the world in 1981. Following the separation, Diana was determined to establish herself as an independent force and to prove that she could be successful without the formal support of the royal establishment. She threw herself into her charitable work with renewed energy, taking on causes that were increasingly controversial and high-profile. Her work with landmine victims, homeless people, and AIDS patients demonstrated her commitment to using her celebrity status to highlight important social issues. Diana's post-separation charitable work was characterized by a more hands-on and emotional approach than traditional royal patronages. She was willing to engage with difficult and sometimes dangerous situations, visiting war zones and areas of social deprivation that other royals avoided. Her 1993 visit to Nepal, where she comforted leprosy patients and highlighted the work of British charities in developing countries, demonstrated her growing confidence as an international humanitarian figure. The period following the separation also saw Diana developing a more personal and confessional style of public communication. Her speeches became more emotional and self-revelatory, and she began to speak more openly about her own struggles and vulnerabilities. This approach was controversial within royal circles, but resonated strongly with the public, who appreciated her apparent honesty and humanity. One of the most significant examples of this new approach was Diana's speech at the Headway National Head Injuries Association Conference in 1993, where she spoke about the anguish of feeling like the most hunted person of the modern age. This speech was remarkable for its candor about the personal cost of fame and its implicit criticism of the media treatment she had received. The speech demonstrated Diana's growing willingness to use her platform to discuss issues that affected her personally. Diana's relationship with her sons became increasingly important during this period, as she was determined to maintain her role as their primary parent despite the separation. She continued to insist on hands-on parenting and worked to ensure that William and Harry had as normal a childhood as possible. Her efforts to balance their royal duties with ordinary experiences such as trips to theme parks and fast food restaurants, the custody arrangements for William and Harry were a source of ongoing tension between Charles and Diana. While both parents had formal access rights, Diana was concerned about the influence of the royal establishment on her sons' upbringing and education. She wanted them to understand the world beyond aristocratic and royal circles, and to develop empathy for people from all backgrounds. Diana's approach to parenting during this period was also influenced by her desire to prepare her sons for a monarchy that would need to be more modern and accessible than in previous generations. She took them to visit homeless shelters, hospitals, and other charitable organizations to show them the realities of life for many of their future subjects. These experiences were unusual for royal children, but reflected Diana's vision of a more engaged and socially conscious monarchy. The mid-1990s saw Diana's emergence as a major international figure independent of her royal status. Her humanitarian work gained global recognition, and she was increasingly sought after by international charities and organizations. Her ability to attract media attention to important causes made her a valuable advocate for issues that might otherwise have been ignored by the international community. Diana's international profile was enhanced by her willingness to travel to difficult and dangerous locations to highlight humanitarian crises. Her 1997 visit to Angola to support the International Red Cross campaign against landmines brought worldwide attention to an issue that had previously received limited coverage. The images of Diana walking through active minefields wearing protective gear became some of the most powerful photographs of her humanitarian work. However, Diana's growing independence and international profile also created new tensions with the royal establishment. Her freelance approach to humanitarian work sometimes conflicted with official British foreign policy, and her high-profile campaigns occasionally embarrassed the government. The tension between her desire to speak out on important issues and the constitutional requirement for royals to remain politically neutral became increasingly difficult to manage. The climax of Diana's public battle with the royal establishment came with her participation in the BBC Panorama interview with Martin Bashir in November 1995. This interview, watched by over 22 million viewers in Britain and hundreds of millions worldwide, was Diana's most direct and explosive public statement about her marriage and her treatment by the royal family. In the Panorama interview, Diana spoke candidly about her bulimia, her suicide attempts, Charles's affair with Camilla, and her own brief relationship with James Hewitt. Most memorably, she declared that there were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded, referring to Charles's relationship with Camilla. She also expressed doubt about Charles's suitability to be king and suggested that he might prefer to take a different role. The Panorama interview was a masterpiece of television communication that demonstrated Diana's growing media sophistication. She appeared calm, thoughtful, and sympathetic while delivering devastating criticisms of her treatment by the royal family. The interview effectively ended any possibility of reconciliation with Charles and made divorce inevitable. The reaction to the Panorama interview was immediate and intense. Public opinion polls showed overwhelming support for Diana, with many viewers expressing sympathy for her struggles and admiration for her courage in speaking out. However, the interview also intensified criticism of Diana within royal circles and among constitutional experts who argued that she had damaged the monarchy irreparably. The Queen's response to the Panorama interview was swift and decisive. Within weeks, she had written to both Charles and Diana, urging them to divorce as quickly as possible. This represented a significant departure from the Queen's usual preference for avoiding involvement in family disputes, and reflected her recognition that the situation had become untenable for the monarchy. The divorce negotiations were complex and sometimes acrimonious, involving issues of titles, financial settlements, and custody arrangements. Diana was determined to maintain her status and her ability to continue her charitable work, while the royal establishment wanted to limit her future role and influence. The final agreement, announced in February 1996, allowed Diana to retain her apartments at Kensington Palace and continue her charitable work, but stripped her of the title Her Royal Highness. The loss of her HRH title was a significant blow to Diana, both personally and practically. It symbolized her exclusion from the inner circle of the royal family and reduced her protocol status at official events. However, Diana was determined to prove that her influence and effectiveness did not depend on titles or formal recognition from the royal establishment. The period immediately following the divorce saw Diana at both her most vulnerable and her most determined. She was free to pursue her own agenda without the constraints of royal protocol, but she also lacked the institutional support that had previously backed her work. This independence forced her to rely more heavily on her own judgment and to take greater personal responsibility for her public actions. Diana's post-divorce humanitarian work reached new levels of international recognition and impact. Her campaign against landmines gained momentum throughout 1997, with her visits to Bosnia and Angola bringing worldwide attention to the issue. Her ability to combine celebrity appeal with serious advocacy made her one of the most effective humanitarian campaigners of the era. The final months of Diana's life were marked by both triumph and turmoil. Her humanitarian work was receiving unprecedented international recognition, but her personal life remained complicated and scrutinized. Her relationship with Dodi Fayed brought new media attention and speculation about her future, while her ongoing battle with the paparazzi reflected the impossible position of someone who needed publicity for her charitable work but craved privacy in her personal life. Legacy of the People's Princess. Diana's enduring impact. The final year of Diana's life, 1997, represented both the peak of her influence as a humanitarian campaigner and the tragic conclusion of a remarkable journey from shy kindergarten teacher to global icon. Her death on August 31, 1997 in a car crash in Paris sent shockwaves around the world and prompted an unprecedented outpouring of public grief that revealed the depth of her connection with people across all backgrounds and nationalities. The circumstances surrounding Diana's final months were complex and reflected both her liberation from royal constraints and her continued struggle with the pressures of fame. Her relationship with Dodi Fayed, which began during the summer of 1997, was conducted under intense media scrutiny that followed their every move. The paparazzi's relentless pursuit of photographs of the couple represented the most extreme example of the invasive coverage that had plagued Diana throughout her adult life. Diana's summer of 1997 was spent largely in the Mediterranean, where she and her sons enjoyed what would be their last family vacation together. The photographs from this period show Diana relaxed and happy with William and Harry, demonstrating the loving relationship she had maintained with her children despite the upheavals in her personal life. Her commitment to being a hands-on mother remained one of her highest priorities, even as her international humanitarian work reached new heights. The landmine campaign that occupied much of Diana's final year represented the culmination of her evolution as a serious humanitarian advocate. Her January 1997 visit to Angola with the International Red Cross brought worldwide attention to the devastating impact of landmines on civilian populations. The images of Diana walking through active minefields wearing protective gear became iconic symbols of her willingness to take personal risks to highlight important causes. Diana's approach to the landmine campaign demonstrated her sophisticated understanding, of how to use media attention effectively for humanitarian purposes. She worked closely with experienced charity professionals to ensure that her visits would have maximum impact, both in terms of media coverage and practical outcomes for affected communities. Her ability to combine celebrity appeal with genuine expertise and commitment made her an extraordinarily effective advocate. The success of Diana's landmine campaign was evident in the rapid progress toward an international treaty banning the use of anti-personnel landmines. The Ottawa Treaty, signed by 122 countries in December 1997, just months after Diana's death, was widely attributed to the momentum created by her advocacy. This represented a concrete example of how Diana's humanitarian work achieved measurable policy outcomes at the international level. Diana's final public appearance was at a charity gala for the Tate Gallery on June 18, 1997, where she was photographed in a stunning Jacques Azagari dress that became one of her most famous fashion moments. The image captured Diana at her most confident and glamorous, representing the transformation she had undergone from uncertain young bride to self-assured global figure. The photograph also served as a poignant reminder of the extraordinary beauty and style that had first captured public attention. The tragic events of August 31, 1997, unfolded in the Pont de la Mort tunnel in Paris, where Diana, Dodi Fayed, and their driver Henri Paul died in a high-speed car crash while being pursued by paparazzi photographers. The immediate cause of the accident was determined to be Henri Paul's intoxication and excessive speed, but the broader circumstances raised serious questions about the role of media intrusion in creating the conditions that led to the tragedy. The news of Diana's death reached the world in the early hours of August 31st, creating an immediate and unprecedented global reaction. Within hours, Kensington Palace was surrounded by thousands of mourners bringing flowers, candles, and personal messages. Similar scenes were repeated outside British embassies and consulates around the world, demonstrating the international scope of grief for Diana's death. The public reaction to Diana's death was remarkable for its intensity and spontaneity. People who had never met Diana felt a personal sense of loss, and the outpouring of grief seemed to transcend normal boundaries of nationality, class, and background. The phenomenon revealed the extraordinary emotional connection that Diana had established with the public through her humanitarian work and her apparent authenticity in a world of manufactured celebrity. The week between Diana's death and her funeral on September 6, 1997, became a unique moment in British cultural history. The queue to sign condolence books stretched for miles, and the continuous stream of floral tributes created a carpet of flowers that extended from Kensington Palace to Hyde Park. The public grief was so intense and widespread that it challenged the traditional British reserve and the established protocols for royal mourning. The royal family's initial response to Diana's death was criticized as inadequate and out of touch with public sentiment. The Queen's decision to remain at Balmoral Castle in Scotland rather than returning immediately to London was seen as evidence of royal indifference to public feeling. The absence of flags at half-mast over Buckingham Palace and the lack of immediate public statements from the royal family created a growing sense of disconnect between the monarchy and the people. The pressure for a more appropriate response to Diana's death eventually forced changes in royal protocol that reflected the public's relationship with Diana. The Queen's decision to return to London and make a live television tribute to Diana was unprecedented and marked a significant departure from traditional royal behavior. The decision to allow the Union Jack to fly at half-mast over Buckingham Palace for the first time in royal history was another concession to public pressure. Diana's funeral at Westminster Abbey was watched by an estimated 2.5 billion people worldwide, making it one of the most viewed events in television history. The ceremony combined traditional royal pageantry with personal touches that reflected Diana's character and values. The presence of representatives from the charities she had supported, alongside world leaders and royalty, demonstrated the breadth of her impact and the respect she had earned through her humanitarian work. The most memorable moment of the funeral was Earl Spencer's eulogy, which praised Diana's humanitarian work while delivering subtle but unmistakable criticisms of her treatment by the media and the royal family. Spencer's promise that the Spencer family would ensure that William and Harry's souls are not simply immersed by duty and tradition but can sing openly as you planned was seen as a direct challenge to royal child-rearing practices and a commitment to honoring Diana's approach to parenting. The immediate aftermath of Diana's death saw significant changes in both the royal family's approach to public relations and the media's treatment of public figures. The royal family began to adopt a more accessible and emotionally engaged public style, partly in response to the criticism they had received for their initial reaction to Diana's death. Prince Charles in particular began to show more emotion in public and to speak more openly about personal matters. In the summer of 1997, the world stood still. Flowers carpeted the streets of London, tears flowed from millions of eyes, and an unprecedented outpouring of grief swept across continents. The death of Diana, Princess of Wales, at just 36 years old, revealed something extraordinary. A young woman who had entered the royal family as a shy kindergarten teacher had somehow touched the hearts of people she had never met. Her funeral was watched by an estimated 2.5 billion people worldwide, making it one of the most viewed events in television history. But how did Lady Diana Spencer, a relatively unknown member of British aristocracy, become the most beloved and controversial figure of the late 20th century? Her story is one of transformation, compassion, rebellion, and tragedy that continues to influence our world decades after her passing. The making of a future princess. Diana Frances Spencer was born on July 1, 1961. At Park House on the Sandringham Estate in Norfolk, England. Her birth came at a time when her parents, John Spencer and Frances Roche, were desperately hoping for a male heir to carry on the Spencer family name. Diana was their third daughter following Sarah and Jane, and the disappointment was palpable. The Spencer family had served British royalty for generations, with Diana's ancestors holding titles and positions close to the crown for over 500 years. Her grandmother, Ruth Fermoy, was a close friend and lady-in-waiting to Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, establishing connections that would prove crucial in Diana's future. The Spencer lineage was deeply rooted in British aristocracy, with the family tree connecting to King Charles II through several illegitimate children. This noble heritage meant that Diana was technically of higher birth rank than her future husband, Prince Charles, a fact that would later be noted by royal historians. Her approach to using fashion as a tool for communication and diplomacy became a template that continues to influence how public figures use clothing to convey messages and build connections with audiences. The investigation into Diana's death, including the official French inquiry and the later British inquest, concluded that her death was a tragic accident caused by Henri Paul's intoxication and the high-speed pursuit by paparazzi photographers. While conspiracy theories continued to circulate, the official investigations found no evidence to support claims of deliberate assassination or cover-up. The investigations did, however, highlight the dangerous dynamics of celebrity culture and media intrusion that had made Diana's life increasingly difficult. Diana's influence on discussions of mental health and emotional well-being became increasingly significant in the years after her death. Her openness about her struggles with depression, bulimia, and self-harm helped to reduce stigma around mental health issues and encouraged others to seek help for similar problems. The work of her sons in promoting mental health awareness through their Heads Together campaign directly reflected Diana's influence and demonstrated the lasting impact of her willingness to discuss personal struggles. The establishment of the Diana Award in 1990 created a permanent legacy focused on recognizing young people who work to improve their communities and help others. The award, which continues to operate today, reflects Diana's belief in the potential of young people to create positive change and her commitment to encouraging compassion and service in the next generation. Diana's influence on the modernization of the British monarchy became increasingly evident with the marriages of her sons to Catherine Middleton and Meghan Markle. Both women were commoners who brought different perspectives and approaches to royal life. reflecting Diana's belief that the monarchy needed to become more diverse and accessible to remain relevant. The more informal style adopted by the younger generation of royals, including their willingness to show emotion and discuss personal challenges, demonstrated Diana's lasting influence on royal behavior. The global impact of Diana's humanitarian work continued to grow after her death, with many international organizations citing her as an inspiration for their approach to advocacy and public engagement. Her model of using celebrity status to highlight important causes became a template for other public figures, and her emphasis on personal connection and emotional engagement influenced how charitable organizations approached their work with vulnerable populations. 25 years after her death, Diana's legacy continues to evolve and influence contemporary discussions about mental health, humanitarian work, and the role of public figures in society. Her life story remains relevant because it addresses timeless themes of resilience, compassion, and the courage to challenge established systems in pursuit of positive change. The shy young woman who became the people's princess transformed not only the British monarchy but also global expectations about how public figures can use their platforms to serve others and create meaningful change in the world. Diana's enduring appeal lies not just in her tragic story or her undeniable glamour, but in her authentic demonstration that privilege comes with responsibility and that true influence comes from genuine care for others. Her legacy challenges each generation to consider how they can use their own opportunities and advantages to help those who are struggling and to work for a more compassionate and just world. The Spencer family's seat at Althorp House in Northamptonshire had been home to the family for over 500 years, housing one of Europe's finest collections of art and antiques. Diana's early childhood was marked by privilege, but also by emotional turbulence that would shape her compassionate nature in later years. Park House, where she spent her first years, was a substantial estate property with 10 bedrooms, but it was also a place where her parents' marriage was steadily deteriorating. The Spencer children were raised primarily by nannies, as was customary among the aristocracy, but Diana formed particularly strong bonds with these caretakers who provided the emotional stability that was sometimes lacking in her family environment. The young Diana displayed an intuitive understanding of others' emotions from an early age. Staff at Park House often remarked on her ability to sense when someone was upset or troubled, and her instinct to offer comfort. This empathy would become one of her defining characteristics, earning her the nickname the Caring Spencer among family friends. She was known to leave little gifts for the household staff and would often be found in the kitchens, preferring the company of the working staff to the formal drawing rooms where her parents entertained. When Diana was 6 years old, her world was shattered by her parents' bitter divorce in 1969. The custody battle that followed was particularly brutal, with both sides airing private grievances in court. Frances Spencer, Diana's mother, had left the family for Peter Shandkid, a decision that was met with severe social judgment in the conservative circles of British aristocracy. During the custody proceedings, Diana and her younger brother Charles were called upon to testify about which parent they preferred to live with, a traumatic experience that left lasting emotional scars. The court ultimately awarded custody to John Spencer, a decision influenced partly by the testimony of Ruth Fermoy, Diana's own maternal grandmother, who spoke against her daughter Frances. This betrayal by her grandmother created a complex web of family dysfunction that Diana would carry into her adult relationships. The children remained at Park House initially, but the absence of their mother created an emotional void that Diana, even as a young child, attempted to fill for her younger brother. In 1975, when Diana was 14, her father inherited the title of 8th Earl Spencer upon the death of his father. The family moved from Park House to Althorp House, the Spencer ancestral seat. This move represented not just a change of residence, but a step deeper into the heart of British aristocracy. Althorp House, with its 90 rooms and 13,000-acre estate, was a magnificent but somewhat overwhelming home for a teenager already dealing with family trauma. Diana's education followed the traditional path of aristocratic young women of her generation. She attended local schools initially before being sent to Riddlesworth Hall, a preparatory school in Norfolk at age 9. Her academic performance was unremarkable, and she struggled particularly with mathematics and sciences. However, she excelled in activities that required emotional intelligence and creativity, showing particular talent in music and dance. Her piano playing was accomplished enough to earn her several school prizes, and she harbored dreams of becoming a professional ballerina until she grew too tall for classical ballerina. At age 12, Diana was sent to West Heath, an exclusive girls' boarding school in Kent. West Heath was known for producing well-bred young ladies who would marry into prominent families, and the curriculum emphasized social graces alongside academics. Diana's time at West Heath was marked by her continued academic struggles, but also by her growing reputation as someone who cared deeply for others. She was known for comforting homesick younger students and often got in trouble for sneaking out of her dormitory to visit girls who were crying in their rooms. The school's emphasis on community service deeply influenced Diana's later humanitarian work. West Heath required students to participate in volunteer activities, and Diana threw herself into these opportunities with enthusiasm. She worked with elderly residents at local nursing homes and helped with disabled children at nearby care centers. These experiences gave her first-hand exposure to people facing challenges and hardships, fostering the empathy that would later characterize her public work. Diana's academic struggles led to her failing her O-level examinations twice, which was particularly embarrassing for a family that valued educational achievement. However, her teachers consistently noted her emotional intelligence and her ability to connect with people from all backgrounds. One teacher remarked that while Diana might struggle with mathematics, she had an advanced degree in understanding human nature. In 1977, at age 16, Diana left West Heath without graduating and was sent to finishing school in Switzerland. Institut Alpen-Vidmanet was designed to polish young ladies in preparation for their debut into society, teaching them languages, cooking, and social skills. However, Diana was profoundly homesick and lasted only 6 weeks before pleading with her father to allow her to return to England. This brief stay in Switzerland was notable mainly for Diana's realization that she was most comfortable in familiar surroundings with people she cared about. Upon returning to England, Diana faced the question of what to do with her life. The media response to Diana's death included soul-searching about the role of paparazzi and invasive photography in creating the circumstances that led to the tragedy. Several major publications implemented new guidelines for photograph acquisition and began to refuse images taken by photographers who had engaged in dangerous pursuit tactics. However, these changes were largely temporary, and the fundamental dynamics of celebrity culture that had contributed to Diana's death remained largely unchanged. Diana's impact on charitable work and humanitarian advocacy. The Diana, Princess of Wales Memorial Fund, established after her death, continued to support many of the causes she had championed, particularly work with HIV/AIDS patients, landmine clearance, and support for marginalized communities. The fund's work demonstrated the practical impact of Diana's advocacy and ensured that her humanitarian legacy continued to benefit those in need. The transformation of the British monarchy in response to Diana's influence became increasingly evident in the years following her death. Prince William and Prince Harry both inherited their mother's commitment to humanitarian work and her more informal approach to royal duties. Their willingness to discuss mental health issues, their hands-on approach to charitable work, and their desire to make the monarchy more relevant to contemporary society all reflected Diana's influence on their upbringing and values. Diana's impact on fashion and style continued long after her death, with her clothing choices continuing to influence fashion trends decades later. The auction of her dresses in 1997 raised millions for charity and demonstrated the enduring appeal of her style. Without academic qualifications and with no immediate pressure to work due to her family's wealth, she initially lived a rather aimless existence. She spent time at Althorpe House helping with her father's new wife, Rain Spencer, whom Diana and her siblings had dubbed Acid Rain, due to her sometimes abrasive personality and her extensive renovations to their beloved family home. In 1978, Diana's life began to take a more definite shape when she moved to London. Her mother purchased her a flat in Coleherne Court, South Kensington, which became a symbol of Diana's transition into independent young womanhood. The flat was modest, by Spencer family standards, but represented freedom and the beginning of Diana's own life away from the complications of her family relationships. Living in London opened up new possibilities for Diana. She took a series of jobs that, while not requiring extensive qualifications, allowed her to pursue her interests in caring for others. She worked as a dance instructor at a private school, teaching ballet to young children. Her love of dance, frustrated by her height making professional ballet impossible, found a new outlet in nurturing the next generation of dancers. Colleagues noted her patience with even the most challenging students and her ability to make dance enjoyable rather than intimidating. Diana also worked as a nanny for several well-connected families, a job that suited both her nurturing instincts and her social background. She was particularly sought after because of her combination of aristocratic breeding and genuine warmth with children. Parents trusted her not only because of her family connections, but because children seemed to gravitate naturally toward her. She had an intuitive understanding of children's needs and fears, perhaps stemming from her own childhood experiences of emotional uncertainty. Her most significant job during this period was at the Young England Kindergarten in Pimlico, where she worked as an assistant teacher. This position, which she began in 1979, was perfect for Diana's temperament and interests. She genuinely loved working with children and was known for her creativity in developing activities that were both educational and fun. The job also provided her with a sense of purpose and achievement that had been lacking in her earlier endeavors. The Young England Kindergarten was an upscale institution serving the children of London's professional elite, and Diana's colleagues there would later describe her as someone who lit up the room when she arrived. Children would run to greet her each morning, and she had a special talent for calming upset or frightened children. Her approach was gentle but firm, and she seemed to understand instinctively how to balance nurturing with the need for structure and discipline. During her time at the kindergarten, Diana was also establishing her social life in London. She shared her Coleherne Court flat with several friends, including Virginia Pittman and Carolyn Pride, who became lifelong companions. The flat became known as a gathering place for young women from similar backgrounds who were navigating their transition into adult life in London. Diana's friends would later describe these years as among the happiest of her life, characterized by freedom, friendship, and the optimism of youth. Diana's social circle included many young people connected to the British aristocracy and upper classes. She attended parties, charity events, and social gatherings where she was noted for her natural beauty and vivacious personality. However, unlike many of her contemporaries, Diana was never known for excessive partying or scandal. She maintained a reputation for being both fun-loving and responsible, someone who could enjoy herself while still maintaining the dignity expected of someone from her background. It was during this period that Diana's path began to intersect more frequently with members of the royal family. Her family's long-standing connections to the royals, combined with her presence in London social circles, meant that she occasionally encountered Prince Charles at various events. However, these early meetings were casual and seemingly insignificant, with Diana later recounting that she saw Charles as her sister Sarah's boyfriend, rather than someone she might have a personal relationship with. The Spencer family's relationship with the royal family was complex and multifaceted. Diana's father had served as equerry to both King George VI and Queen Elizabeth II, and the families had been neighbors at Sandringham for decades. Diana had grown up seeing members of the royal family as family friends rather than distant figures, which would later prove both advantageous and problematic in her relationship with Prince Charles. As 1979 turned into 1980, Diana was a young woman who seemed to have found her place in the world. She was successful in her work with children, surrounded by good friends, and beginning to be noticed in London society for her beauty and charm. She appeared to be settling into a life that, while perhaps not extraordinarily ambitious, was fulfilling and stable. However, fate and family connections were about to propel her into a completely different existence that would transform not only her own life, but the institution of the British monarchy itself. The stage was being set for one of the most dramatic and consequential love stories of the 20th century, though Diana could hardly have imagined the extraordinary journey that lay ahead. Her experiences of family trauma, her work with children, her natural empathy, and her aristocratic background had all prepared her, perhaps without her knowing it, for a role that would require immense strength, compassion, and resilience. The shy young woman who delighted in teaching children to dance was about to become one of the most photographed and scrutinized people on Earth. The fairy tale beginning and royal awakening. The summer of 1980 marked a turning point that would change not only Diana Spencer's life, but the course of British royal history. What began as a casual encounter at a countryside gathering would evolve into the most watched romance of the decade, capturing the imagination of millions worldwide while simultaneously setting the stage for personal struggles that would define Diana's relationship with the royal family for years to come. The pivotal moment occurred at Petworth House in Sussex during a weekend house party in July 1980. Diana, then 19 years old, was among the guests at this gathering of young aristocrats and royals. Prince Charles, who was 32 and facing increasing pressure to find a suitable wife, was also in attendance. What made this encounter different from their previous casual meetings was the timing and circumstances. Charles had recently ended his relationship with Anna Wallis, and the British press was intensifying their speculation about when the heir to the throne would marry. Diana later recalled this weekend as the moment she first saw Charles as more than just her sister Sarah's former boyfriend or a family friend. She was struck by his apparent loneliness and vulnerability, particularly when he spoke about the recent assassination of Lord Mountbatten, his beloved great-uncle and mentor, who had been killed by an IRA bomb in 1970. Diana's natural empathy was immediately engaged, and she offered comfort with a sincerity that touched Charles deeply. Her response was genuine and unguarded, quite different from the calculated approaches he had experienced from other potential romantic partners. The conversation that weekend revealed Diana's intuitive understanding of the burdens that came with Charles's position. Unlike many young women who saw only the glamour and privilege of royal life, Diana seemed to grasp the isolation and responsibility that weighed on the future king. This understanding, combined with her natural warmth and beauty, made a profound impression on Charles, who was unaccustomed to such empathetic attention. Following this weekend, Charles began to invite Diana to various events and gatherings. Their courtship was conducted largely away from public scrutiny initially, with Diana joining Charles for private dinners, country weekends, and sailing trips aboard the royal yacht Britannia. These early dates revealed both the promise and the challenges that would characterize their relationship. Diana was enchanted by Charles's intelligence and passion for his interests, while Charles was drawn to her youth, beauty, and apparent devotion. However, even during this romantic period, there were signs of the fundamental differences that would later cause problems. Charles was a deeply intellectual man with established interests in architecture, philosophy, and environmental issues. He had spent years developing his views on these subjects and expected his future wife to share or at least appreciate his passions. Diana, while intelligent in her own way, had received a very different education and had different interests. Her strengths lay in emotional intelligence and human connections rather than intellectual pursuits. The age difference between them was also significant in ways that went beyond the 13 years. Charles had been shaped by the formal protocols and expectations of royal life from birth. Hidden below the nursery floor, Royal Guard finds Princess Diana's private journal,